Hi guys, I'm Leo from Leonerd. Welcome back to a brand new video. And in today's video, we're going back to that series called Camera Basics Made Easy, Things Made Easy. So where I cover basically things that are difficult, but I make them easier for you that is beginning in photo or video. And today it's only for video. I'll do a video about this, which is frame rate, about photos, because it's different for video and photos. I'll cover the frame rate for photos as well, but in today's video we will talk about frame rates in video. So let's get started. Your camera, whether if it's a GoPro, a cell phone, or a DSLR, a mirrorless, it doesn't shoot motion. It doesn't shoot a single thing, a single motion. It shoots various frames, which are like various photos that are stitched together inside the camera, creating a video. So that's how videos work. You get a ton of photos and stitch them together and it creates motion, but they are actually frame by frame. So how to know what frame rates are better to use in what situations? Let's get into it. Before we start, I have to give you a very important tip. So if you are shooting at 24 frames per second, double your shutter speed. So put your shutter speed on 1/50, 1/48, but cameras don't have that, so 1/50. So for frame rates, there are some pre-established patterns. There is 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, and 60 frames per second. But you aren't limited to that. Depending on the camera, you can have 120 frames per second, you can have 5,000 frames per second. It depends on camera to from camera to camera, but the usual numbers are 24, 30, and 60. So let's talk more about each one of those. So let's just start with 24 frames per second, which is the cinema and movie standards. So yeah, right now I'm filming at 24 frames per second, and it isn't exactly 24 frames, but it's not for this video, because here we're trying to make things easier, not more complicated than they actually are. So yeah, 24 frames per second has this cinematic look, this natural look, because almost all movies rock the cameras in 24 frames per second. So we are used to it and don't even know. And that's why the most of filmmakers use 24 frames per second as the standard too. I use for my standards, but sometimes I change my frame rates, and I'll talk about that later. So what does 24 frames per second do? It has some very nice motion blur. As you can see, my hand isn't getting focused here, 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 here when I'm moving. It has this motion blur that indicates movement, and various films use that, various movies use that in their favor to show some movement, a fast car, a bike, or whatever. So yeah, that's 24 frames per second. It has a very nice movement to it. And let's talk about other frame rates. Now we're going to 30. So right now we are at 30 FPS, and as you can see, we had this major crop right here, and that depends from camera to camera. I just can't tell you, oh, if you have this camera this will happen or this won't. No, you have to play around with that. Some cameras have this on their specifications, but if they don't, you have to discover it yourself. Like I discovered it trying, and that one of the reasons that I like 24 frames more than 30, because I don't have to crop this image. Like I'm with a 55mm lens right now, and with this crop it's not really 55, it's a little more punched in. So you have to keep those differences in mind, and that can happen depending on your camera. So yeah, play around to discover that. and at 30 frames, as you can see, we have less motion blur. We only increased 6 frames from 24 to 30, but we have less motion. So if you want to capture things more focused, not with such motion blur, such movement, you put at 30 frames per second, and that should be okay. But should try first so you don't miss your shot. Keep that in mind, and let's go to 60 frames per second. So right now I'm shooting again at 24 frames, and I'll talk about 60, and I'll explain why I'm not shooting at 60 right now. So 60 frames per second is actually the slowest slow motion possible. So if I recorded in 60 frames per second, you would hear me talking like this. So yeah, you don't want that to happen to your footage. So you only shoot 60 frames per second at certain shoots, certain occasions. So yeah, another thing that kept me at 24 right now, it's because I usually shoot my videos at 4K, and at 60 frames per second I can shoot 4K, only 1080, which is great still, but I am shooting this video in 4K and I want to keep that in 4K. I'll shoot 24. And yeah, this depends on your camera too, but keep in mind that 60 is already slow motion. So if you want to get things slower, smoother, have little camera movement, you can put in 60 frames per second. That it will be more stable and sometimes very cinematic. You just gotta know when and how to use it. I still am recording at 24 frames per second, but I'll leave some samples again. So what does 120 frames do? Basically 120 frames per second is a better slow motion, a slower slow motion. So you can get more details. You won't have camera shake when you're doing it handheld. Obviously you will have, but things are so slow that it won't be so apparent as if you were shooting at 24 frames per second and doing this. So you have to use that in certain occasions. I use that sometimes to make some cool looking videos, some cool looking parts of my video. And yeah, you have to use that only if you want to shoot slow motion. There are other frame rates that are slower, like 480 and 960, I think. Those are very slow, and you can use that in your favor to get details, to improve your video, to add some dramaticity. Yeah, that's a good word. So you can use that in your favor too, but you have to know how to use it. So guys, this video will end here. If you liked it, please leave it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, turn on post notifications, that little bell icon, so you don't miss out whenever I post a new video. And yeah, in today's video I tried to make frame rates that are kind of complicated in a simple way, because I know the struggle going through YouTube tutorials and having to get that on your mind all by yourself, because I learned from that and I still do learn some new things from that, searching on YouTube or other websites and trying. But the key is trying. You won't get good at mastering your frame rates for each situation if you don't try. So grab your camera inside, go to your room and test every single frame rate. Do like this. You will see that there are various differences, and then you get notes about like 30 FPS that cropped my camera, so I will only use this for this and this and this. At 120 FPS it's too slow, so I will only use for this. So yeah, that depends on your camera too. Those crop things, HD, 4K, that will depend on your camera. But you have to try, you have to practice, so you can master it and get very good B-roll, very good sequences and very cinematic videos, hopefully. So I'm Leo, I'm out, and bye bye.